Hello everyone, Gila Hayes here. Network President Marty Hayes and I have come into the video studio in these final days of 2024 to compile the very last piece of the January 2025 Members Journal. We waited as long as we could this year because last year we'd already recorded our year in review when two men in the Midwest robbed a network member. He handed over his wallet and ran to cover, but one robber pursued, and with a bullet literally whizzing by and nicking him, the member shot back. We paid the member's attorney for a late night visit to the jail, and because that jurisdiction holds anyone involved in a shooting overnight, our member was released the next day, at which time law enforcement told him that they did not expect any charges. They were right, but we were all relieved to know that he had, as counseled by his attorney during their late night consultation, waited quietly until the system completed its process. I mention that because it's a good illustration of what we do at the network. I was thinking that because a tenth of our active members came to us as new members between January 1st and today, it would be useful to talk briefly about what we do for members and why we do it the way we do. Let's begin by outlining what we do for members, starting with what may be the least recognized, but in reality the most important, that being our member education. That starts with over a dozen video lectures and a book by Massad Ayoob. It's a big book, more than 300 pages long, and that's followed up monthly by video and written articles in this journal that address a wide range of topics. Non-members can enjoy previews on our website, and members access the full member training education package with the videos online or by plugging in the USB thumb drive that we send all new members, and that plugs into your smart TV or your computer. And you know, considering how much we invest in education, both for members and our outreach to the public to increase understanding of self-defense, use of force, I think it's unfortunate that a lot of first-time callers and new members express less concern about understanding self-defense law and speak to a greater concern about the expenses that arise after self-defense. So I'm always happy when expressed by a gentleman who has been part of the network family for about 3 years, when members view and realize the importance of the materials we provide. We appreciated a little note that we received recently in which a member wrote that his library is full of books by Massad Ayoob, Mark McYoung, Gavin DeBecker, but for him he wrote, "The network's videos are the glue that put it all together." We thought that that was great. While I wish more armed citizens would avidly pursue training to better understand the legal parameters of self-defense, reality shows that often people come to the network and to the many lookalikes that have popped up since we opened in 2008 because they want to know that they'll have help with what Gunsight founder Jeff Cooper called the second problem, or problem 2. Marty, could you discuss problem 2 and what did Cooper mean when he wrote about it?
Well, I will do that happily, but I'm going to go back a minute and
Please.
talk a little bit more about that educational package.
Please.
It is so important that our members view all of the videotapes they have accessible to you, take notes while they're viewing them, and have that material able to be regurgitated if asked. You see, the defendant in a self-defense case gets to have the jury view his or her actions through the actions of a reasonable and prudent person, knowing all the defendant knows and seeing all the defendant saw. Consequently, if you know that you saw certain pre-attack indicators and you've been trained in pre-attack indicators, then you can relate that to the jury. If you understand the law regarding use of force in self-defense, you can relate to the jury what you knew about the law, and then upon the proper questioning from your defense attorney, you can explain why you felt that your actions were within the law. If you understand pre-attack indicators, you could explain your knowledge of pre-attack indicators to the jury and then explain to the jury what you observed and or heard the individual that you use force against doing that led you to reasonably believe that your actions were justified. If you understand the law of self-defense in your jurisdiction, and it's important that you have your jurisdiction down, you could explain to the jury how your pre-knowledge led you to use the amount of force only that you felt was reasonable and necessary, and that should go a long way towards winning an acquittal. But more importantly is, we hope you don't go to trial, because ahead of time, you and your attorney are going to sit down with the prosecutor and explain your knowledge of self-defense law, your knowledge of a lot of the intricacies involved in making a self-defense decision, and hopefully the prosecutor, or perhaps the grand jury, if it's a grand jury state, will look at it and say, you know, this is more likely a reasonable case of self-defense, not a crime. And so that is why it's so important that you not only review the DVDs, review the videos that you've watched, that you take Massad's book, go through it, highlight particular things, make notes in the margins, so you could show the jury, show the judge ahead of time, hey, I had this stuff down. I knew this ahead of time. I didn't just pick this up a week before trial and start reading it. And so it's just so important. In fact, one of the reasons why we never have had one of our members go to trial after an act of force and self-defense is because of this knowledge, this training. And so if you don't get anything out of this lecture today, get out the fact that the training is vitally important. Okay, now, how was I going to respond to your question?
I appreciate your endorsement of the training materials and kind of our prioritization, because I do think that it actually stands as greater importance than solving problem 2. But problem 2 dates back many decades ago to the great legacy of Gunsight founder Jeff Cooper, and in his writings he defined problem 2. And I feel like some of those old ways have kind of been lost. So tell us a little bit about what Cooper said about problem 2 and why he deemed it important enough to write about.
Yeah, Jeff Cooper's whole reason for being in the beginning, and this was back in I think it was the mid-70s to early 80s, when he started teaching armed civilian self-defense, and he founded Gunsight, is he wanted his students trained to be able to solve problem 1. That was the attack against themselves. And so that was really his whole focus. It was only after he started hearing rumblings from outside his little circle about, what about problem 2? What about the legal aspect of use of self-defense? He started addressing it in writing. And he actually came a long way from those first few comments in his Cooper's Corner to his later comments in Gunsight Gossip, that he really began to acknowledge that there is a problem 2. The problem 2 being the legal, both criminal and civil repercussions of use of force in self-defense, but also perhaps the psychological repercussions, the societal repercussions, the financial repercussions, and so that's basically what problem 2 is. When I started the network, we had problem 1 taken care of. We knew how to shoot for self-defense. We knew what level of force to use for self-defense. And frankly, I'm talking about my own training school that I had then. But while we would address the legal aspect of use of force and self-defense in our training courses, we really didn't have a vehicle to address the legal aftermath. And so I applied to and was accepted into law school.
Why don't you pause there for just a moment? I want to say a couple of things about problem 2 as recently as this last year, as it impacted network members. And then I think that we want to talk a little bit about how you took your readings of Cooper's work and your own studies and began to ideate that there must be a better way to deal with problem 2. But I did want to add that the need to address problem 2, as Cooper very correctly identified, in interacting with the criminal justice system after use of force and self-defense arose for 2 network members during 2024. One incident involved a non-fatality shooting to stop a serious physical assault after being knocked down, and the other was defensive display of a knife over which no charges were filed. But in the immediate aftermath, we thought it best to have an attorney review the facts and stand by in case it mushroomed into a bigger problem. It did not. But I think those incidents epitomize why we opened the network in 2008 and why it has grown from little more than a good idea, as Marty will tell us here in a few minutes, and the investment of its founders into a 22,000 member organization such as it is today. So Marty, let's go back to your thinking, why you wanted to take law school at a fairly mature age. And sorry.
You think I was fairly mature then?
We're uber mature now. But how through your legal training that grew and developed in concrete plans and people that you joined up with, and how that has become the organization as it exists today?
2003, I decided to go to law school to start solving problem 2 for our students. And my original thought was, gee, I go to law school, I become an attorney, I'm able to help defend our students, and we're good to go. And then I came to realize, maybe I don't want to work that hard, because attorneys work hard. And we really appreciate the work that our attorneys do. Are over 400.
500.
500
about
now?
500.
Awesome.
We've been sitting there for a while.
500 network affiliated attorneys, because they work hard. And especially when they get a case that they know the person is innocent. And so I didn't know if I wanted to work that hard. So I figured, well, I could guide civil or criminal defenses, becoming, by virtue of being the president of the network, as long as I was paying the attorney for our member. And so that's what we did. We decided, well, let's start this organization and collect a little bit of money, and we'd put money aside in the legal defense fund, and someday we'd have enough money to help defend our members after self-defense. And so that's what we did, and it's worked out phenomenally. We've got much more money than I ever thought we were going to need, and so we're good to go as far as that goes. What are the statistics now as far as how many members, et cetera?
Well, I've got some numbers for you, and I guess probably the best way to start out is to acknowledge that over our almost 17-year history, the network has paid attorneys to represent 35 members, expending in excess of $325,000. Those incidents, people are oftentimes interested in what happened to other people, and I think that they're looking for mirrors or things they might want to avoid for themselves. But I've identified roughly a half dozen categories that those 35 incidents can be slotted into. And those actually pretty closely mirror what researchers like John Lott have been telling us for decades. Over 40% involved defensive display of a firearm without shooting. A little under 20% resulted in fatality shootings. A bit more than a tenth of the time, members shot in defense of themselves or their family members, but no one was killed. 10% more involved physical defense against an attacker, with just a little under another 10% involving pepper spray use. The final, approximately 1/10 of the times, a member neither drew nor fired a gun, but their assailant tried to get them charged with having used a gun during the confrontation. And some of these categories almost seem trivial. And the viewer may wonder, well, why is legal representation needed if a person defends with pepper spray? We know it's not injurious, or the person escapes after physical force that stops further aggression. So Marty, I'm wondering, what is the legal risk when an aggrieved aggressor alleges that they were threatened by a person who might even have had a gun? Why is legal representation such a good idea if no one is injured?
Well, it is a good idea. It may not be absolutely necessary, but it's our thought that it's better to play offense than defense.
Okay.
And so let's say you're involved in a altercation with somebody, but it doesn't go to blows. It doesn't, maybe a push or a shove happened. Maybe you displayed pepper spray. Maybe you even had to fire a little shot of pepper spray to get them to back off. You need to let the police know that you were accosted. If you had to use any force in self-defense, that means that you are the victim of a crime. And so you need to report that crime for a couple reasons. First, it's a societal thing to do because that individual that you were able to fire a shot of pepper spray at and had him leave may have just committed a more serious crime an hour or so earlier, and now the police have someone to go and track down and question about that other crime. But more importantly for our uses is that we want to be able to have the attorney right here with the business card in our shirt pocket. In the case that the police decide to show up and question you about it, you can pull out and say, yes, officer, I was involved in this incident. It was a case of self-defense, and I would love to talk to you about it. As soon as we get my attorney on the phone or down here in person, we'll sit down and we'll have a chat about it. And that's just so important. We need to make sure the police have the information necessary for them to investigate the criminal activity. And the criminal activity basically is what was happening to you after an act of self-defense. We've had many people involved in cases where I said, call this attorney, get him on board, make sure you got his number, and nothing ever happened to it. And that's great. We'll pay the $500,000 up front because we'll know that will short circuit a possibly much more expensive case later.
Very good. Well, and I think many times when these confrontations happen, the very great difficulty is staying on the side of the angels. When circumstances are unclear about who started a conflict, the risk is losing that right to argue self-defense in court. I'm continually amazed at how rapidly rude words or actions turn into exaggerated accusations and sometimes even into real violence. So Marty, I'm wondering what happens in the legal arena to the right to argue self-defense for a person who's seen as the guy or gal that provoked the incident.
We hear about the initial aggressor issue, but I don't believe it is really discussed too much in the classes that I've attended and in the discussions on the internet about the legalities of use of force. The initial aggressor defense will come up as a defense, I shouldn't say defense, as an issue, will come up before the trial begins in a closed conference with the judge and the other attorney, and they will claim that, listen, this individual that we've arrested was the initial aggressor. The case law here in this state says that if a person started the fight, then he or she cannot argue self-defense. Well, in order to argue self-defense, you have to say, I did it, but I was justified. And here's why. Well, if you can't argue the here's why part of self-defense, then all you get to do is just say, yep, I did it. And if you did it, then that's likely enough information for the police, or I should say for the prosecutor, to convince the judge or jury that you had committed a crime. So it's so important that you not be viewed by the judge as the initial aggressor. What will happen is there will be statements made to the police, perhaps the guy you shot justifiably even, has buddies that were in the background and saw it, and they start complaining to the police. My brother didn't do anything to that guy. The other guy started the fight. He threw the first punch. He was the one that was road raging, and so they'll convince the prosecutor that you, the defendant, was the person that started the altercation. And that can happen in a number of ways. Probably the most common one is in the road rage situation. Two people are going down the road, one guy cuts the other person off. Oh my God, I can't believe he has offended me that badly. And so the guy that gets cut off starts yelling, honking his horn and screaming, and drives up beside him and flips him off. And the good guy decides, I can't handle this, I'm going to stop and discuss it with this guy. And pretty soon it just turns into a big mess. The guy that was the recipient of the initial being cut off pulls a knife. Well, you know what happens when somebody pulls a knife on you. You pull your gun. And then pretty soon you've shot someone. And if you had just let it go, nothing would have happened. But you had to get pissed off and honk your horn and tell him what a bad son of a bitch he is. Well, a judge will likely view you as being the initial aggressor in the confrontation. Cutting somebody off simply happens. I mean, I was driving the other day, and all of a sudden, I saw these headlights right in my rearview mirror. I mean, they're like 10 feet away. I go, shit. Did I just pull out in front of somebody? And quite likely that I did. I thought I looked both ways, but maybe I didn't look to the right hand long enough. So I just pulled over and let the guy go by, being the good guy. If I would have let him stay behind me and get more pissed off, then maybe we would have turned into a road rage. But let's just get rid of this guy, let him go beyond. So don't do anything that will make someone believe that you started this whole altercation. And if something happens that could be perceived that you were the initial aggressor, hey guy, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pull out in front of you, okay? Please forgive me. Let's just go our own separate ways. So.
Yeah, it just, people are really tightly strung these days, and it's awfully easy to cause offense. And like the driving example, not even know how you did it. So I'd like to close out this part of our year in review with the observation that the network would not have grown into the exclusive member assistance group that we are if we refused to help members who really had used force to stop threats to life. And, you know, owing to concerns that first-time callers express and the questions that were asked about denials, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what the network does for members after an incident. Marty, you've already sort of edged into there talking about having an attorney to call, but where do we fit into that?
Well, I've seen a disturbing trend lately in some of the other self-defense companies that provide attorneys for people, provide money for people, provide a SWAT team, a legal SWAT team for people, a strike force for people. They like to tout their successes on YouTube. And they'll take their newly acquitted defendant victim of the criminal trial and pop him up in front of the TV camera and say, listen, Jonathan, tell us your story. This was awesome how we got you off. And so it rambles on for half an hour, 45 minutes. And the person gets to be the, quote, hero for a while, so he's happy to do it. And the company, whether it's a self-defense insurance plan or attorneys, they get to pat themselves on the back and and it brings in new members. I get it. But what they're not doing is they're not looking out for the individual's best interests a couple ways. One is the best interests legally, because there's still the civil aspect. A person can be sued up to 2 years and maybe 3 years, depending on the jurisdiction, after one of these incidents. And so you need to keep your goddamn mouth shut after you get acquitted and just say, listen, if you want to know the story, you have to talk to my attorney, who will say, listen, we're not going to talk about this.
Yeah.
And so the fact of the matter is we've had a lot of these cases where we didn't say a word. A couple times the individual wanted to talk because they'd seen these other people and say, man, I want to tell my story.
Yeah.
No, we're not going to let you. And even though knowing that it would bring us more members, we're not going to let you, because that would not be looking out for the best interests of our member or the client. So we've had many of these, 35 instances, probably about half of them pretty serious, and but we don't talk about it. So that's why you don't hear or see the videos. We do have a couple videos out there that we've done. One was Spencer Newcomer. I don't think we had him on videotape, but we did have him in an interview. The other one was John Daub. Both of these guys, the statute of limitations had run out, so they couldn't be sued by the plaintiff's or the potential plaintiff's family, and it was already public information. There maybe had been a trial already, and so all the information's out there. So we decided, that wouldn't be so bad as to get that information out.
Certainly, I think that our record speaks for itself, but I also think that it bears noting that we wouldn't be here 16 or 17 years later if we had a history of telling people no, when really all they had done was to use force in defense of themselves or their families.
And if we didn't assist anyone who was reasonable in their actions, that would come out on the internet immediately. There's been a couple cases recently where a company failed to assist after one of these actions, and they have been castigated by others in the community. We want to assist our members. We will look every way to make sure that assistance is warranted, but if something occurred in the situation where we know that it was not a legitimate act of defense, but it's got to be clear cut. So we're going to help people if at all possible. And frankly, if we made promises and we didn't help people, then the whole world would know that anyway.
And getting back to your discussion of people calling for help, the public seems to have an idea that there's a dozen such calls per week, when reality shows us that our members are probably the least likely people in the world to get into fights. And so it's an interesting kind of conflict there. And I thought it might be useful, by way of introduction, to talk a little bit about who our network members are. And I think the most reliable source for that is nearly 17 years worth of referred by tracking, because we do ask people how they found out about us. And what it seems to show is that many of our members joined on the recommendations of people they trust, and often their instructors. I admit that we cherry-pick the best of the best armed citizens for members, and while you and I enjoy going to gun shows as much as the next hobbyist, we don't market there. We do have an education-based internet presence, but we don't hard sell membership there either. There's no promises of be entered in a drawing to win something really big or win a free gun. None of that has ever been part of our outreach. So from day one, our introductions to our members have come from trusted instructors and mentors to armed citizens, and many of those people serve on our advisory board. I'm thinking of people like Masad Ayub, John Farnham, Tom Givens, Carl Wren, Dennis Tueller, and attorneys who teach. as well as litigate, Emmanuel Capelson and Marie D'Amico. Outreach by recommendation, while not resulting in explosive growth, has given us a really stable membership with pretty high renewal rates, and also the joy of associating with like-minded men and women who are joined together for the same reason that we formed the network, and that's to be sure that none of our own people face the criminal justice system alone after self-defense. While members often quip that they never want to call for help, I think that they share our satisfaction in knowing that for the few people who do have to make that call, every member has contributed to the help that was given. You know, nearly 17 years have added a lot of facets to the network and to its mission, but I think the most important thing that I've learned is that like-minded people joined together are a nearly undefeatable force, and there's such a joy to associating with people who think the same. You know, they give us the gifts of their trust and their input, and to help each other through the aftermath of self-defense. I think we're indeed fortunate to enjoy the stability, both financially and by reputation, to maintain the network at a size that lets us best serve those members. And as a result, we're not spending all our energy beating the bush trying to make new sales. It's just not something we've had to do. We don't hard sell because the network is well capable of fulfilling its mission for a select group of members. And while we don't mean to be harsh, the network is actually better off without poorly trained or uncommitted gun owners who don't really put in the study, and they don't invest the effort to learn and practice their responsibilities as armed citizens. Those aren't our people. At the heart of the network's mission is a question, and I think that question is what is practical and what is needed. And as a result, we're a down-to-earth, basics, no-frill organization of like-minded men and women joined together to make sure that none of our people face the criminal justice system alone after self-defense, after doing nothing more than defending themselves or their families against deadly attack. And in my mind, it's nothing more than that, and it's all that and nothing less. Well, that's a wrap for 2024. You have any final thoughts, Marty?
Is this where I do the hard sell?
No.
Oh.
Are you going to give me a gun?
Yeah, we'll have a drawing for free ammo. Oh my God. Now, if you consider yourself one of the elite members of the Armed Citizens Society, if you've gone to training courses such as Ms. Ayub and John Farnham and a number of others, if you're serious about making sure you never make a mistake, then join on up with the network. I think we're the cheapest out there by far. One of the reasons is because we don't have to pay an insurance company high premiums to make sure that we've got the money to help you. We've got our own money to help you. And so we would just invite you to join up, or if you're already a member, invite you to renew. And let's keep this ball rolling for another 17 years.
I'm too old for that. Thank you, network members, and thanks to viewers who watch to learn more about our work. We welcome your questions through our website or give us a phone call.